All eyes are on Chicago. It is game day for the Democratic Party, the kickoff of the Democratic National Convention, and the countdown to Vice President Kamala Harris formally accepting the nomination of her party later this week. You are looking at a live picture inside the United Center in Chicago, where the Chicago Bulls play. Our team of correspondents and experts are on the ground. The convention officially kicking off about 2 hours and 15 minutes from right now at 6:15 p.m. Eastern. Donald Trump's convention now but a distant memory as this save democracy at all costs Biden-Harris Walz political story reaches its first dramatic climax. Tonight is the first sliding doors moment for President Joe Biden, who had planned to speak Thursday night at his convention's close, but will instead open the week as the man who passed the torch to his dynamic and loyal number two as the ultimate act of political sacrifice and public service. He will be preceded by some of the party's biggest stars and most influential voices. To name a few, United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Congressman Jamie Raskin, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Senator Raphael Warnock, longtime Biden friend and ally, Congressman Jim Clyburn, Secretary Hillary Clinton, First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, and the man of the hour, President Joe Biden, who just 1 month ago made that historic decision to drop out of the race for president, paving the way for what we're all watching, this political phenomenon that has taken the nation by storm in the form of the candidacy of Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz. Tonight's speech will cap off a political career that has spanned more than half a century, a life in public service that culminates in this decision and this moment, a moment the New York Times describes this way as, quote, bittersweet. They go on. Tonight's speech was, quote, supposed to have supercharged his final push for a second term, but instead will serve as an opportunity to pass the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris. Quote, aides say Mr. Biden will use the speech to argue that Ms. Harris is the best person to carry on his legacy now that he's no longer in the race. Her candidacy as the party's standard bearer, he will argue, is the natural result of the choice he made 4 years ago to place her just a heartbeat away from the presidency. Times goes on, quote, but the president is also expected by aides to focus on the stakes of the 2024 election and what he sees as the existential danger if voters choose to return former President Trump to the Oval Office. In his speech, according to aides, he will argue that if voters elect Ms. Harris, it will mean that democracy is preserved. That is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Out in Chicago for us, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli, plus NBC News correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, who's been covering the Harris campaign for us, and former U.S. Senator and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, Claire McCaskill's here. Mike Memoli, how is this for you? You had planned to, you all planned to be there, but you thought you'd be there covering this president who you've covered longer and better than just about anybody we all know. And now he's playing the role, frankly, this is a speech thematically that bills a lot like the speech that President Obama gave for him 4 years ago, the stakes for our democracy, the sort of special qualifications of his number two. It's a really, really incredible bookend.
Yeah, it really is remarkable, Nicole. Now, first of all, for me, I consider myself at this point an honorary Delawarean with all the time that I've spent in that state over the years. So I've planted myself in the Delaware delegation here on the convention floor. But as I've been covering the Biden story for the last, it's more than 16 years now, I've always been struck. One of the reasons why he's such a fascinating person to cover is the way these stories sometimes echo moments in the past. And I was thinking really about how you and I would talk in the 2020 primaries when things change so suddenly, when then former Vice President Biden was down and out, and then suddenly quickly became the front runner for the nomination. And I would talk about how he was good at being gracious, that as these other younger, ambitious Democrats were stepping aside one at a time, endorsing him, he would stand with them and praise them, talk about their bright future in the party, talk about how they were making the ultimate act of sacrifice to drop out of the race maybe sooner than they needed to endorse him to unite the party. Well, that tonight is really what President Biden's mission is. Yes, this is a very bittersweet moment for him. Because remember, Nicole, 4 years ago, I was one of a very small group of reporters in an empty convention hall when during the COVID crisis he had to speak in a dark room to talk about the stakes of this election. He was very much looking forward to, his entire team was looking forward to this moment of triumph toward the end of his political career, a large, full convention hall to celebrate his accomplishments and to power him, they hoped, to 4 more years. Instead, he's speaking on the first night. But it is something that he's mindful of. One of his closest advisors telling me he's made a decision and he moves on. Yes, this is difficult maybe for some other people, including some people he's related to, quite frankly. But he sees now this as a critical mission for him. He, as they put it, saved democracy in 2020. He can make this case uniquely tonight about what's at stake if Donald Trump returns to the White House, and he's going to stick to that message. Joe Biden is nothing if not consistent, and that's going to be the message he brings to the convention hall here tonight.
I mean, Mike Memoli, the event in Maryland last week erupted in organic, spontaneous thank you, Joe. And Kamala Harris felt the moment, I think, in her bones and said, first she stepped back from the podium and just let that roar fill that venue. And then she went back to the microphone and said, they're thanking you for a lot of things. I mean, talk about this relationship, which I think was opaque to a lot of people. How close the vice president and president have become, especially over these last 8 weeks.
Frankly, Nicole, one of the underreported parts of this tumultuous change that we've seen over the last month plus is the way in which both of these figures have been loyal to one another. Even as he was fighting for his political career, thinking he could make the case to Democrats to stay in this race, President Biden did everything he could to elevate his vice president at the same time. He invited her to be part of a number of events with him, including the 4th of July, holding her hand up with him on the Truman balcony. He asked her to join him just in the last few weeks for the return of those hostages because he knew what an important moment that was as well. And in return, his vice president, at a time when there were some in the White House who wanted her to make more calls to more Democrats to try to rally support for him, she didn't want to do that for this reason, which I found so fascinating. She didn't want to give any hint to any Democrat that might misinterpret her remarks, that might then spill out into public view as her preparing to take over, when that was not the case. She was sticking with the president who chose her. And so tonight, I was at that event last week, Nicole, and one of the dynamics that I've been thinking about from last week that I think we could see tonight is there's an element of this event with all the tributes that will lead up to President Biden that I think aren't going to maybe mean as much as they might have in another circumstance. And what I mean by that is in 2016, he saw the "this is your life" treatment at the Democratic convention as he was leaving office as vice president, when many in that room thought Hillary Clinton was about to be the next president. And now he doesn't necessarily feel that those tributes in the same way. But I was very closely watching President Biden's face as that crowd was reacting to him last week in Maryland, the way in which he knew his vice president was allowing that reaction to build. And as much as I think he wants to power through in this moment and stick to his speech and talk about what he believes is at stake, I think we know the emotions might also overpower him in this moment as well.
Well, I think, Yamiche, that the other part of what makes this so emotional for him is that Vice President Kamala Harris has been public and effusive, as has her husband, in saying we love the Bidens. And I heard it, and I keep saying it on this show, I heard it in Wilmington the first day after he'd stepped off the ticket. And he said, "I'm right here, kid, I'm watching you." And you just could feel the effect. It is such a lonely fishbowl, being the president. And she was sort of in that fishbowl with him. And this passing of the torch is as much the story this week as the political phenomenon that we're witnessing in her candidacy.
That's right. And when I think about this moment for Democrats, where many of them are relieved, many of them are very excited to turn sort of the page here and lean into the Harris-Walz ticket. But there's this deep admiration for President Joe Biden. And one of the people who are really embodying that is the vice president. as soon as that debate ended, she was the one who was on TV coming up with talking points on the spot, saying that he shouldn't be judged by those 90 minutes, that he should be judged by the long history of his time as a public servant. And then over those weeks where so many Democrats, people that knew, frankly, President Biden even longer than her, came out and started publicly questioning him and publicly telling him he should get out. She was behind the scenes telling her staff, we are not engaging in this. We're going to let Joe Biden have the respect and the dignity to make his decision, and we're not going to be sort of trying to figure out ways to elbow him out. And that transferred over to when he finally did make the decision to drop out. She was there to say, I respect, and at times I love Joe Biden, because she understands that this moment would not be possible in this way if it were not for Joe Biden, both picking her to be his vice president, but also there was that 15-minute period where he dropped out and he did not say he was going to endorse her yet. And then that endorsement came, and it was almost a second wave of, okay, not only is he dropping out, but she now has this big endorsement that really has powered her through and allowed her to build this organic enthusiasm and allowed her to build this campaign, and also allowed her to really fend off anyone who would have tried to take this nomination from her. And as much as this night, of course, is about Joe Biden and paying respects to him, this is also going to be a historic night for so many Black women in this party. Black women have been the bedrock of the Democratic Party. They've been the most loyal voters, but they're also the people who have been at the leadership in the DNC for years and years and years. And this night, seeing an African-American woman be passed the baton by Joe Biden, it really is going to resonate, and it feels so powerful to so many women that I've been talking to. This is a historic moment, a historic DNC for so many reasons, but chief among them, Black women. After Shirley Chisholm ran, after Fannie Lou Hamer was denied a seat at that DNC, you now have a Black woman who's going to be at the top of the ticket, and that means so much to so many people in this room that will be here as we all, of course, are waiting for this to get started.